Welcome into the newest episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. Glad to have you here with us, joining us for episode 94 of the pod, inching closer and closer to the 100 mark. Glad to have you all here with us. Want to give you a quick reminder as we're getting into today's episode about the worst Star Wars moments, which we covered last week. We covered the best Star Wars moments according to ChatGPT. This week, we're covering the worst Star Wars moments according to ChatGPT. Going to be going over those top 10 worst moments here in just a bit. But before we get into it, want to say a thank you to those of you who are subscribed over on YouTube to the Hoth Hangout channel there. Check out the video version of every podcast on YouTube, as well as all of our latest reactions to the newest Star Wars shows when they go live. Shout out to the 451 of you who are subscribed on YouTube, including the infamous Snoop Dogg, part of the Hoth Hangout community now. Want to
Nope.
say Snoop. Want to say also that if you ever need to contact us, you can contact us via email at hothhangout@gmail.com with your Star Wars thoughts, questions, or otherwise, and we'd love to showcase them here on the podcast. The Hoth Hangout podcast is also findable wherever you get your pods, including both Apple and Spotify. And if you're listening on either of those platforms or any platform that allows you to leave a 5-star review, leave a 5-star review on the podcast. We'd appreciate it very much. And it does also allow it to be more easily discovered by other people as well. You can find us on the socials, whether it be Instagram, TikTok, or X. We are at Hoth Hangout on each of those platforms, as well as the Hoth Hangout community Discord server, for which can be found as a link down in the show notes of today's episode. Check it out and see what it has to offer. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to be discussing the worst moments in Star Wars history today. Coming off of last week's episodes, talking about the best moments, we're going to try to keep it as positive as we can. Talking about some of the 10 worst moments according to ChatGPT. Going to be judging just how well ChatGPT did with this list as well. But before we get into all of that, Joey, what's going on, dude? How you been?
Pretty good. Had a pretty good week so far. Was looking forward to this podcast because, like you said, we're normally pretty positive here on the Hot Hangout, and just by the topic alone, the worst moments in Star Wars, it's not something we would normally go through. And to be honest, I don't know if I've ever made a list like this, like and the top 10 worst anything. It's always like the top 10 best movies, best sports teams, things like that, but never like the top 10 worst. So this is gonna be an interesting one.
To be fair, we still haven't made a list. It was
Yeah, it's
ChatGPT
true.
who made the list for us, but we're just going to be judging and grading ChatGPT's list as we go through it. But yeah, like you said, kind of a different episode for us. But let us know what your thoughts are on the worst moment in Star Wars history for you personally, those of you listening. So we're going to be getting into that here in a second. Of course, before we touch on those things, do have two relatively big pieces of news this week that were released here in just the last few days. First of all, Boba Fett, it was announced officially, or perhaps I should say, I believe it was a report coming off of an interview with Tamora Morrison, if I'm not mistaken, the actor of Boba Fett, who said that he is not appearing in the new Mandalorian and Grogu movie, which will come out May of 2026. Whether that is true or not, I mean, I guess you can take him at his word for it. Maybe he's like pulling the wool over our eyes and he's going to have a surprise appearance. But at this point, it looks like Boba Fett is not going to be appearing in the Mando and Grogu movie. I would guess a lot of this is probably coming off a less than stellar reception of the character in the Book of Boba Fett show. Just I guess what was it 3 years ago? But I don't know. What were your thoughts when you heard this piece of news, Joey?
I just feel bad for Tamara Morrison when once again he just I don't know what the expectations were going in, what conversations he had going into either season 2 of Book of Boba Fett or anything, or even season 1, to be honest, because Mando kind of took over that show for a couple of episodes, or even with the announcement of the new Mando and Grogu movie, if there was any expectations there. I think the what's interesting about what had happened this week regarding this news is a couple of outlets reported saying that this is what Tamara Morrison had said. There was actually a convention here in Chicago called Fan Expo that he was at, and that's where this report kind of came out of. There were other reports also, though, that came out of that were questioning some of the attendees for that particular panel, and they all said like, no, that's not what we got out of this. They all said that, when he was asked about that or something similar to it, he kind of said, like kind of, he was a little bit coy about it, not really like spilling the beans. He's not sure, that type of. So I don't know what to believe. Obviously, it's, we weren't there, I wasn't there, and sometimes when we hear these reports, you kind of take them as law, but I don't know. I'm not sure where we're at with this, so we'll see what happens. I guess we'll have to wait for sure in a couple years to see if Boba Fett makes an appearance in that movie.
It would be a fun surprise if, after the reports of him not being apparently involved with the project, that it's like, oh shoot, he shows up in the final act to help him out in some
Yeah.
way or another. But I mean, that's another thing I haven't even thought about. Like, what is the plot going to be for this movie? At what point is it going to take place after season 3? I would assume. I don't even know if that's officially been announced yet or not. I guess it's just an assumption on my part whether the new movie is going to be taking place after season 3. But anyways, that's kind of a sidebar, but we'll look forward to hearing more about the details for Mando and Grogu movie. Of course, we are still quite a ways away, but kind of I guess, somewhat of a bummer to hear Boba Fett will not be involved in the project, as at least for now. That remains to be seen for sure. Perhaps could be changed in the future. So, the other piece of news we wanted to cover. This is the big one. I want to say this came out either yesterday or the day before at the time of this recording. The Acolyte is officially been canceled, will not be renewed for a second season. Um, this is I think there's different ways to look at this. I think for a show that was received largely negatively, I think the immediate reaction is to think, "Oh, okay, good. Like they're not doing more of the thing that we didn't connect with very much." Um, I will admit that was kind of my initial reaction, and then I thought about it more, and I was thinking kind of about like the episode we did about our final thoughts on the Acolyte, the most recent Knights of the Jedi Knights of the Round Table episode that we did just a couple weeks ago, and you know, I think if you're given something, um, whether it's in, television or movies or just life, whether you're given when you're given something that's less than stellar or even less than that, like less than ideal, that does not meet the bar, that does not meet the expectation. I would rather give the thing didn't that I didn't enjoy, like one more opportunity to potentially enjoy it. Not to say that a season 2 of Acolyte would have been, anticipated very highly from a lot of people, especially coming off the first season and the reception it got. But now it just feels like this weird, like, kind of the same boat that the Book of Boba Fett is in. Like this weird,
Mhm.
although probably a little bit worse, if I had to say, in terms of like the sentiment around it. Just this one-off season that exists, and now it's like, what do we do with this? Like, what does this even really mean for Star Wars that we got a season of this show? It wasn't received well. A second season was shot down, and now it just is kind of like there. You know what I mean? Like, I
Mhm.
would almost rather have another season, even if it's not up to par again, just to, like, add a little bit of completion to this story. The teasing of Plagueis, the teasing of Yoda, as controversial of decisions as those might have been, like, now it's just like, they teased it, and now we now it's over, we're done
Right.
with it. It's like, "Okay, I guess." I don't know, what'd you think when you heard this news?
I think we both said it that we wouldn't be surprised if this day came and they didn't continue on with the Acolyte. So although maybe that's what we said, it still was a little bit of a surprise to me, to be honest. Because if one thing that I've seen is that even if you have maybe not the best results, a lot of these companies will continue on down the road anyway, because either it's like, they're tone deaf, they don't really see it, or they don't like see they think that's an incredible thing. And listen, Acolyte had some good moments. There were some things, it wasn't all absolutely terrible. There were some things that I really did question, sure. But like you said, the thing with Plagueis, I still think that the stranger Camille was a very good role, very good character to come out of it. So there were some things, but I even as we talked about it in that episode, or just any over since the end of the season, I guess series now, that like who are we supposed to be rooting for? So we, I was more interested in that. I was interested in how this story was gonna go, because w- was this gonna be like, oh, we're gonna be rooting for Chimere, we're gonna be rooting for Osha, is that where we were gonna end up going? And unfortunately, we'll never know now. And you made a good point that this kind of puts that out there, like this big question mark in the Star Wars universe. Like, now what? What was all that about? Like, it's gonna be like people's like fever dream. Like, do you remember that show, The Acolyte? Yeah, I remember. What was that about again? And that's what's gonna end up being it. And I bet and I think this is what I discovered with something like The Last Jedi, is that it took me years after it to go back and be like a little bit more appreciative of it. I bet you I'm going to be the same way with The Acolyte, where I'm going to go back and be like, you know what? Yeah, it had its faults, sure, but just like The Last Jedi, it was trying something. It was going, it was going to a different road, and sometimes you need that shakeup in storytelling. But unfortunately, this isn't the Star Wars. This isn't the Skywalker saga, where there's going to be another episode of it. But this is, unfortunately, this is the end, at least for now, for the Acolyte. And just like Boba Fett, it was more like they just didn't continue. I don't think this was ever greenlit. I don't think though, like season 2 was ever greenlit for the Acolyte. So to say it was canceled, that was something I had read on Twitter. Is that it wasn't a cancel, it just wasn't continued. I mean, potato. At the end of it, there's no more Acolyte, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of like Boba Fett right now, Book of Boba Fett. Right now, there's no second season of Book of Boba Fett. Right now, there's no episode season of Acolyte, and it kind of that's all that really matters. Is that right now this story is unfortunately done.
Yeah, and I think after Skeleton Crew, this an Acolyte, like this marks the end of sort of the new shows that had been ushered in or announced, years back, whenever it was. Maybe like I don't think Rogue Squadron is officially greenlit or anything like that, or if that's even in production or not. But like after Acolyte, now that it's been canceled, Skeleton Crew is really the only new show remaining that has yet to be seen, and of course that comes out soon here in just a couple months. But yeah, it just the Acolyte it exists as a standalone season now, and like you said, it will be interesting to see how 5-10 years from now people look back and how their thoughts have adjusted or shifted over time as this show ages, and see kind of what people's
Yeah.
feelings are once they've been removed from the current timeline of thoughts surrounding the show.
Right.
So
I mean, the fact of the matter, fact of the matter is that there are fans of the show too. So
yeah,
there are going to be people who will want this to come back at some point. So will it? I'm not sure, but we'll pour one out for the Acolyte and for all the fans of them as well.
right. Yeah, something that could not be off the table is like bringing characters like Chimere into
Hmm.
other New Republic era, or excuse me, Old Republic era shows. So maybe in the future we'll see some of these characters return. Just might not be as part of the Acolyte. So those are the two pieces of news we had today. Before we move on to our discussion of the top 10 worst moments in Star Wars history, according to ChatGPT, we do have a couple viewer comments we wanted to showcase. These are actually from our recent trailer reactions to Rebuild the Galaxy, as well as the Skeleton Crew trailer reaction. I believe we did both of these like roughly almost 2 weeks ago. And we have some great comments here. The first of which is one from Anthony on the Rebuild the Galaxy trailer. Anthony says, now, if only we could use the cornerstone to alter the events of the Disney sequel trilogy. I'm actually looking forward to this. Ironically, Joey, I think Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy will break less canon than the Crapolite. It's funny how
How
this
how
this
topical is
comment,
that?
yeah, this comment tied into the news feeds. Nice. I guarantee I have way better viewing experience with this than the show that shall not be spoken of again. What's interesting watching this trailer, I see some relevant parallels between its storytelling and Skeleton Crew. That's actually a good thing. May the force be with you guys. It is kind of. I mean, this is back to what we were talking about with our trailer reaction to Rebuild the Galaxy. For those that don't know, this is something made within the Lego universe, and so with the comedic tone that Lego takes, it rarely misses, and it also like doesn't infringe upon, or even have the opportunity to infringe upon like whatever Star Wars fans hold as really important because they're approaching it in a comedic way, and so whatever happens, it's fair game, and like I think that just it has been a really good formula for Lego, with the projects they've done in the past. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm probably gonna fall in the same boat as Anthony once I've seen it. I'd be surprised if I like this less than the Acolyte. I think I will like it more than the Acolyte, but yeah, I don't know. So, did you have any any thoughts on that, Joey?
And I think Anthony is probably was reading the future from like 2 weeks ago, apparently. But yeah, I think something like this doesn't have many expectations, right? There's going to be like a large population of the fandom that may not even watch this. So this is just one of those things that is supposed to be fun. It's meant to be fun, and it will be fun. Something like the Acolyte really did have a lot of expectations behind it, and for a pretty decent chunk of the fandom that just didn't come through for.
Yeah. We also had two more comments from our Skeleton Crew trailer reaction. The first of which is from Spy on Sports. Shout out to Spy on Sports for the comment here. Spy on Sports said, "Goonies meets Flight of the Navigator meets Explorers meets Broom Boy from The Last Jedi." Is Broom Boy the kid that's at the very end of the film
Yes,
who's
good
like,
shout out for that one. Yeah, it's a good one.
yeah, nice. That's I don't even know if Broom Boy if that's ever been referred to as the official name for that character, but it is now. So, yeah, I actually probably need to rewatch Goonies. I think it's been I don't know, at least 15 years since I've seen that movie. So, that might have to be on the watch list before the premiere of Skeleton Crew for me. So, yeah, once again, looking forward to this coming out just in about, I don't know, 3 months' time. So, oh, Gibbo has never seen Goonies. Might have to do
I
a
think a Hoth Hangout watch through
yeah,
for us.
yeah, Hoth Hangout reaction to Goonies. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, that
Yeah.
that is gonna be kind of a fun, you know, crossover of genres of sorts. It sounds like with the new Skeleton Crew show. Anthony also left us a comment on the Skeleton Crew trailer reaction. In addition to his comment on the Rebuild the Galaxy trailer reaction, Anthony said, "I'm excited and anticipating having a good time with these kids, some or all of whom I suspect, unbeknownst to them, may be force sensitive." Ooh, I like the theory. I like it. Jude Law's force using character and this Outer Rim unknown regions traversing story. Ben, this miniseries is a as homage to Steven Spielberg's 1980s Amblin films and anthology series E.T., The Goonies, Back to the Future, Amazing Stories, and even George Lucas's Star Wars TV movies, Ewoks: The Battle for Endor and Caravan of Courage from the mid 1980s. Side note: we were considering doing a reaction to those, so that might be in the future as well. Anthony went on to say, "Hope to see some brand new and some familiar heroes, villains, including the Pirate Nation and the Remnant Empire, and anti-heroes. I'm interested in getting to know the owl-like character who's giving off galactic astronomer and wise sage vibes. Am I the only person who wishes we could see the 2-episode premiere in theaters? May the force be with you, Ben and Joey. P.S. Did you catch the fuzzball creature in the glass cage who originally appeared in the Michael Jackson short film Captain EO, which was a Disney and Lucasfilm production co-written by George Lucas? That's a deep cut. I would never have noticed that unless you
Mm-mm.
said it, so I'm glad you said it, Anthony, because, I never would have noticed it, but that is a deep cut, like you said, but, yeah, lots of inspiration taken from past productions and works by Spielberg and Lucas and all coming together in the culmination of this show, and it's gonna be fun. I almost said George Lucas. Is Jude Law a Jedi, or is he merely Force sensitive? And it sounds like Anthony thinks some of the kids are Force sensitive. What do you think about
Mhm.
that?
I like that theory. That's a cool one. I mean, that would be the reason why he's there, maybe to find them, protect them, something like that. So yeah, that's a I like that. I like that theory. Hopefully that pans out.
Yeah, yeah. I'm looking forward to this show. I feel like the stakes are lower with this show, so the reception is probably gonna be more positive than some of the recent Star Wars projects, but
Hmm.
it remains to be seen. So, thank you all for leaving your comments. Remember, you can leave a comment each week on the video version of the podcast on YouTube, and we'd love to showcase them as part of the podcast episode the following week. We also asked you last week during our discussion of the 10 best Star Wars moments, what is your favorite Star Wars moment? Folks on YouTube responded with 25% saying the Darth Maul fight in episode 1. 56% responding with "I am your father." Of course, probably unquestionably the most iconic Star Wars moment. 6% saying the Mandalorian and Grogu meeting, that moment in that show, and then 13% responding with the trench run. So, I mean, I think this is indicative just from the YouTube side of the poll that the original trilogy holds some pretty strong favor with a lot of people, especially, of course, how can you top "I am your father"? But let's see what the folks over on Twitter said in regard to some of these same to the same question. Darth Maul fight getting no love for the Duel of Fates, unfortunately, over on Twitter. I am your father getting 25% of the vote. The Mandalorian and Grogu meeting getting 50%, and the Trench Run getting 25%. So, Twitter folks, our Star Wars TV people, YouTube folks, our
Mm.
original trilogy fans. I think that's what we've learned from that. So. Um, but yes, look out for the YouTube community tab, as well as the Hoth Hangout account over on Twitter this week, where you can cast your response to this week's polls and have your voice heard and showcased in next week's episode of the podcast. Which, speaking of having your voice heard, that question will be in reference to today's topic, um, the worst moments in Star Wars history, according to ChatGPT. Now, coming off of last week's episode, if you didn't listen to last week's, we did the top 10 best moments in Star Wars history, according to ChatGPT. The overall consensus by the time we were done, w I mean, I don't wanna speak for you, Joey, but I thought ChatGPT did a pretty good job. What do you think?
Think so. I maybe like three of them. I might not have put in there. Two or three of them I might not put in there, but I think it hit like a lot of the solid ones, like the I Am Your Father, Trench Run, Duel of the Fates. I mean, it definitely hit on a few of them, but there were a couple of them that may have not have been exactly right. But it is an AI. It's still learning. Maybe if we ask it in 5 more years, it'll be a little more accurate.
Yeah, yeah. So both you and I have read over the list of the 10 worst Star Wars moments according to ChatGPT. I don't know if I feel as strongly about these 10 just as we move into it. It's gonna be a list where I'm looking at it, and I think there's, like, 1 or 2 things that are glaringly missing.
Okay.
So we might talk about those as we go through. We're gonna give all 10 of them, and then at the end, you and I will both give probably the one moment that we would add to the list that wasn't included, that we personally would have as a part of perhaps our top 10 worst moments of Star Wars history. So, having said that, should we check out, what ChatGPT named the 10th worst Star Wars moment?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. So for the 10th moment, worst moment in Star Wars history is the Martez sister arc from the Clone Wars season 7. According to ChatGPT, this arc features Ashoka Tano and the Martez sisters criticized for its slow pacing and perceived lack of importance to the overall story. So I think right away, I will say that I wouldn't mark this as one of the top 10 worst of all of Star Wars. I mean, I get, okay, yeah, maybe it was a little bit slow. But I'll be honest, when they mentioned this, it wasn't something that I thought, like, yes, absolutely belongs on this list. Was it a little slow? Was it like, was it really needed in this? Not really, but I mean, I can't say that everything in the Clone Wars, 7 seasons was like absolutely like incredible either. So I would throw this kind of like, okay, maybe this storyline wasn't like exactly needed, but I wouldn't like mark it as the top 10 worst by any means.
Yeah, I was shocked that this was on the list. I mean, I think part of the sentiment of having it on the list, maybe by some people, would be that, everyone was so excited when it was announced that there was gonna be a 7th season after, like, 6 or 7 years of it not, being continued. And then it comes out and, like, the first I think it's, like, 2 or 3 episodes are just really about the Martez sisters and Ahsoka's relationship and, kind of, like, getting into trouble, and it's really the end of season 7 that's amazing. It's part of, kind of the last 2 or 3 episodes of season 7, but I don't know, like, if you asked me, "Is this one of the 10 worst moments in Star Wars history?" I definitely would say no. I don't even think that I can say I don't think this would be on my top 20, but,
Right, yeah.
I guess it makes the list of top 10 for ChatGPT, so can't argue with ChatGPT. They think that ChatGPT is really down on the Martez sisters, which I
Yeah.
actually, I understand that people didn't really like the arc and that it was more slow paced and boring. I like them as characters a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope they bring them into the Ahsoka live action show. I think that could be a fun addition. But anyways, so number 9 on the list of uh, worst moments in Star Wars history, according to ChatGPT, midichlorians. So this one I feel like is warranted because I personally take no issue with this. But when I hear this, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who was in the theater in 1999 when this film came out and had been a fan of the original trilogy for, at least a decade plus prior to that. And hearing the Force described in such like I think when you think about the way the Force is depicted in the original trilogy, there's a lot of like mysticism and mystery and almost like an unexplainable quality to it. And then you hop back into the Phantom Menace, whatever it was, 16 years later after Return of the Jedi, and here's Qui Gon like explaining to fans like, actually, the Force can be like measured by midichlorians or M count, as I guess Disney calls it nowadays. But um, I personally don't take issue with it. Uh, but really what it was, it's like an introduction of this thing that is a measurement of the force or a scientific explanation of the force. But which of course left many fans feeling like it undermined that feeling of mysticism and magicness to the force that the original trilogy really gives. I totally get that. Um, and I personally don't take issue with this, and it wouldn't be in my personal top 10, but if I was constructing a list for, like, the general consensus of Star Wars fans, I would probably have this in my top 10, so I don't know, what do you think?
I'm in the same boat. I mean, I was one of those people that was an original trilogy fan and watched this movie in the theaters, and me seeing this live, I was like, okay, well, there's an explanation. Like as it was happening live, I'm like, okay, that's what that is, and I didn't really take issue with that at all. I just said, well, here's your explanation. That's fine. But like you said, not a big issue for me. But if we are talking about what is if I'm ChatGPT and I'm searching, I'm developing this list. This makes sense. This makes sense for people who just does not like it so much to the point like you made that Disney is calling it MCOT now. They don't even want like this around as much, because they know it triggers people's, they're just getting annoyed by that, So I get it. I this makes sense as far as this list, and although like you said, maybe not on my personal 10, yeah, this is something that belongs on this list for sure.
Yeah, they're distancing themselves more and more from that.
All right. All right. So number 8. Okay, this one. This one's a good one.
This
Number
is
8.
this is low on the list, I think. I think this should be higher.
Somehow Palpatine returned. The great line from Poe Dameron from The Rise of Skywalker: "The abrupt and unexplained resurrection of Emperor Palpatine, which many felt was a lazy and unearned plot device." At number 8, just kind of like what you said, I feel like it should be higher, but we see this being memed all over the internet. We see this moment, particularly this moment, where just like somehow this happened and with no explanation. That's kind of the whole point of this particular scene. And if you didn't, and I was in the room, not to brag, but I guess to kind of brag, I was in the room during Star Wars Celebration when the Rise of Skywalker trailer was released, and at the end of it, at that panel, they showed that trailer. All went to black, and then if you remember, at the end of that, you hear the Emperor's laugh, and
Yeah,
everyone
yeah.
kind of goes crazy. The lights come back on. Ian McDermott is right there, and it's incredible. And we're like, oh, and he's like rolled it again, and then we watch it again. It was all very exciting, right? But then we left the panel, and we're like, how are they going to do this? He got thrown down the reactor shaft, and how is this going to happen? So you're kind of waiting, the months until the movie comes out, and this is the explanation: is that somehow the Emperor has returned. So, yeah, I this belongs on this list. This would belongs on my list too. So, as much as I really, really wanted to like Rise of Skywalker, uh, I think we marked it as easily one of our lowest of the movies that we had watched for in Star Wars. So to have this scene being in this list makes sense. I definitely would have put it higher though.
Yeah, this would be easily top 3 probably for me. I mean, I don't know, like, I can't I'll say more on this probably later at some point in this list, but I think the other thing about this that really doesn't feel good is that it undermines a lot of what the previous 2 movies did. It's like, here's this villain of
Hmm.
Snoke. It's like, ooh, there's some secrecy here. Like, what's he about? Like, I remember going on YouTube back in what year did that come? Like, did Force Awakens come out in 2015? Um,
Sounds right.
like going on YouTube between Force Awakens and Last Jedi and watching
Hmm.
like a fan theory video about Snoke like every other day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that
It was
was so fun, wasn't it? That was a good time.
Yeah, it was exciting, and then, Last Jedi happens, and obviously, like, what happens to Snoke, and you're like, "Oh, okay. How are we gonna have, like oh, Kylo must just be the big bad villain in the last movie." And then here comes Disney like, "Guess what? Here's Palpatine." And you're like, "What? How is this?" So it did feel kind of like casting that line out to fans of just like, "Here's some nostalgia. Come get it. Come on, come on." So,
You almost had it.
you almost got it. Not quite. Anyways, so yeah, I'm definitely not a big fan of that one. So, ChatGPT, you're correct to have it on the list. I think it should be a little bit higher personally, but number 7. Oh, I'm glad that I get to talk about this one to kick number 7 off because I unironically love this scene. And I'll tell you why. Um, this is the first film where Yoda was done in CGI form rather than puppeting form. And so, you see him in 99, he's being controlled by Frank Oz. See him in 2002, he is this amorphous CGI blob jumping around the screen. It's the end of the film. Count Dooku has just disarmed Anakin, literally, and Obi-Wan is down for the count as well. Yoda walks in, in his little like cane. He's like, "Oh, look at me, I'm so weak, right?" And then you see what he can actually do. And let me tell you, this acrobatic lightsaber duel with Count Dooku may have been divisive with fans. People either loving it or hating it. But it was the first time we got to see Yoda in such a physically active role that for me, I was like, "Whoa, that's awesome." And so this will make probably fans of the original trilogy even a little bit more frustrated with me when I say this, but I saw this film before I saw the original trilogy. Um And so this is the first version of Yoda that I ever experienced.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't even think of that.
Him, like, flipping around the screen and, uh, so, there's some sentimentality there for me that probably doesn't exist for almost every other Star Wars fan. So I honestly don't understand why this would be top 10. I mean, I can understand people being like, "That's not how Yoda should be. He's supposed to be this wise old sage who," you know but I feel like it just fits the nature of the role. Like, he's this, like, small, tiny, wise, like, meek appearing, and then when it comes down, when the, what's that phrase? When the metal hits the road, what's the phrase? Rubber hits the road?
Rubber hits the road. Yeah.
Yeah, when the rubber hits the road, Yoda's just like, "Actually, I can do all of this insane stuff," and it's just a fun scene to watch. I quite literally I have a memory of being how old would I have been? Probably, like, 6 at the time. Maybe even younger, like 5 or 6, watching this with my dad for the first time, and when this scene happened, maybe this is not a good argument for why it shouldn't be on the list, but we just start, like, belting laughing,
Yeah.
like "Oh my gosh," like, Yoda's
Right.
so, maybe that's an argument for why it should be on the list, but, I personally would not have this on my list. Would you have it on yours, Joey?
Probably not on mine either. I again, let's go back. I was there for a little bit of the original trilogy in the theater, and I did see this in the theater as well, and I reacted pretty much very similar to how you and your dad reacted, where and you know what the best part of not the best part, but to ramping up to this scene is the fight is incredible, right? But what I loved right away was when he kind of moves his cape aside or his shawl aside, and
Yeah.
he takes his other hand, uses that to like use the force to get the lightsaber. He could have just kind of just whipped, grabbed it like a normal person, but he had to use the force to do that. Right then, I'm like, oh, it's on. I am very excited about what's going to happen right here. I don't know. I Again, this is a list that overall that this is something that people kind of united and said, oh, we don't really like this particular scene. I'll be honest, I don't know, I never looked into why. If it is the effect that he's supposed to be this old wise master that maybe doesn't act in this way. I don't know if that's it, or I mean, but he's a Jedi. He's gonna know how to fight. This is one of the things. I don't know if it's the time difference between when Attack of the Clones is and when he ultimately dies later in the trilogy, if that doesn't seem like it fits. So like I said, I've always enjoyed this scene. Even today, I still like it. And in fact, if you've ever played Yoda in any like game after that, it was always very fun because he's jumping around like all over the place. In Battlefront 2, I think when you could play like the heroes versus villains mode, or um just like the regular in multiplayer mode, if you unlock Yoda, that's exactly how he fights. So I don't have issue again with this particular scene, this particular moment, but I know that as a fandom, there are going to be people that have issue with it. So does it belong in the top 10? Probably because of that as well. I mean, the prequels, I know that there are some non-fans of that as well. So this is something that uh, belong in this list from ChatGPT.
Yeah, I'll back off on it. It wouldn't be on my list, but
Not mine either. Not mine either.
yeah. Alright, what's
Uh,
number 6?
Number 6. See, then here's another one. Okay, and I get it again because just for that same reason, it was part of the prequels. This one's part of the sequel trilogy that people didn't like, part of Last Jedi. Canto Bight subplot. The side mission to the casino of Canto Bight criticized for being a distracting and ultimately inconsequential part of the film. I mean, yeah, I guess, is this like the worst of the top 10? I wouldn't put it at the worst. I will say I really do like the score during the Canto Bight scenes. That's a lot of fun. If for those who remember, this is kind of like a casino type of area. Lots of betting, lots of rich people spending money. and I believe Finn kind of gets caught up in it, and then Rose is the one that realizes like, oh, this is what's um kind of funding war. These are the people that are funding the war and all this, on both sides. So there was a little bit of information that came out of it. Was it super important to the storyline of The Last Jedi? I don't know about that. But they need the whole point. They went to this planet to get the code breaker. I think that was
Yeah.
the name of the person they were trying to get. But they ended up getting DJ from this planet, who just so happened to be a code breaker too. So there's that whole problem that that was a little bit problematic. Oh, luckily we found another one. It
Yeah.
wasn't the one that we were looking for. So I see issues with this, sure. I mean, again, it is part of the sequel trilogy, not very well received, overall. But again, there are sequel trilogy people that fans. So I'm not gonna poo-poo this too much. But yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, it was a little inconsequential. Sure, it wasn't like the best, but there were some things out of it that I actually did enjoy. Like I did enjoy the score. I enjoyed a little bit of like just kind of that information of how this is, the what was the line that Rose said? Oh, she wishes she could like put a fist through this whole planet or something like that. So there was a little bit of storyline here that I certainly appreciated, but I wouldn't put it on my top 10. Top 10, maybe top 20, or top 25 that I'm just like, okay. And the only reason is because like that it was brought up here. I wouldn't have come up with this one. The fact that this was brought up is like, oh yeah, I guess that wasn't like really great. But I wouldn't put it in top 10 though.
Yeah, I feel like this belongs on a list of like top 10 most inconsequential Star Wars moments. Like, I feel like for something to be a worst moment, something really egregious has to happen. And I feel like this whole scene, nothing egregious happened. It just wasn't important. You know what
And
I
it
mean?
was kind of long too.
Yeah, it was long. Like, it was long, a little bit boring, and wasn't
Pod
important to
racing.
the plot.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. I didn't mean to say that out
Yeah,
loud.
yeah. Now this is pod racing. You know, in the original edition of Phantom Menace, that scene was actually, like, twice as long as it is in the
we should
final
we
cut
should
of the
we
movie.
should watch that over and we should watch it over and over to see how many times it takes us for us to actually stop it.
Imagine, like, 40 minutes of pod racing. That'd be wild. But, yeah, Canto Bite, probably wouldn't be on my top 10 either, but most inconsequential Star Wars moments, definitely. Worst, probably not, but having said that, the next moment is also from the same film, The Last Jedi, and I would argue this moment definitely belongs on a top 10, maybe a top 3 even. Leia's spacewalk, as we're referring to it, the bridge of the ship explodes, all these people fly out into space, including General Leia Organa. This was the film that came out right after, the passing of Carrie Fisher, and so, this scene happens. You go into the movie thinking, "Okay, how are they going to, um, how is the character of Leia going to not make it through this film?" Because obviously they're not going to have her in the next film. And so this scene happens and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe they did it that way. Wow." Like, well, I guess wait, she's floating towards the ship? She's in the vacuum of space using the Force to pull herself towards the ship. And it was just this moment. I literally had people in my theater. I was more like mouth open, like, "What's happening?" sort of vibes. But I literally had people in my theater who were, like, yelling at the screen, like, "What?" Like that's how, just I think ridiculous this looked on screen when people saw it for the first time. Using the Force to survive this explosion and float back to the ship. Just, uh, it feels like it was one of those moments where it's like, well, the Force can do anything if you and it was like, I don't think that's how the Force works, but
If you really believe,
yeah, yeah. So this is just a moment that lives for me personally, this would be top 3 as probably the moment from this film the most. Like people like to poo-poo a lot on what they did to Luke Skywalker's character in this film. This for me was was way more jarring than what they did to Luke's character. Um, like floating through the vacuum of space. Like, yes, you're strong in the force, but I don't think that's like that means that you're just invulnerable. And then she like dies in the next film in a very undramatic fashion, just kind of by like reaching out in the force too hard, or like I don't know. It could have been done so much better, I think. And anyways, I thought they had an opportunity to, like, send her off in a way that was, like, a little bit brutal, but it would have been meaningful to the story, and then she just floats back towards the ship, and you're like, "Oh, what?" What'd you think when you saw this, in theaters for the first time?
This is on my top 10 also of worst moments here in Star Wars, for all the same reasons. I mean, we've talked about it in the past where some things you can get away with like in animation, you know?
Yeah,
And I think this is one of those moments that if it was an animation, we'd be like, well, all right, I suppose. Because I want to say that there is actually another moment that maybe this happens in animation, but I don't know if there's a Canaan thing or something. I thought I read somewhere that there was something, that it kind of happens. But either way, in live action, and I was the same way. I thought this was the end of Leia, and as super sad as it was, given the circumstances of what actually happened with the actress Carrie Fisher, you would have accepted it, right? A lot of people would have accepted this to kind of be the end, and we could have been just kind of done with it. I do understand that there was going to be more things that Leia was supposed to be doing, particularly um, training Rey, for in the next film. So I get that, but I feel like this, like you said, this was a missed opportunity to maybe have a brutal ending, but actually have an ending that kind of made sense. So I think that was probably a pretty big misstep on the directors for this movie here. So as much as I try to like Last Jedi, and I do. I think there's definitely things that I do enjoy about it. This one really, this one I can't. There's no argument to it. This part of everything that happened here, and and by the way, and I know this isn't part of the list, but Admiral Akbar also dies during this particular scene, and it's just kind of like, oh, by the way, Admiral Akbar's gone, and I feel like he was a pretty big role kind of in the original trilogy. There you go. It's a trap. So
yeah.
I think I think it was a shame. I think it was a misstep, like I said, and yeah, but it's on my top 10 too.
About number
Uh,
4, what do you got
number
for the
f-
next
number
one?
4 here,
I
ChatGPT. What? Yeah, initially,
I
what do you think?
I feel like all 5 of the top 5 are very deserving of being on
Okay,
this list. Yeah.
yeah, I'm right with this one too. Anakin and Padme's romance in Attack of the Clones. ChatGPT says the poorly received and often cringe-worthy romantic dialogue and scenes between Anakin and Padme criticized for lacking chemistry. Yeah, I remember watching this in the movies, in the movie theater, and thinking, "Really? Like this is this is, and y- it just didn't feel like this was the love story of Star Wars, because that's what they wanted this to be. This was Anakin, this was Padme. This is what drew him like fully into the dark side. This passion, this love. And I don't know if it was the way it was directed, the way it was written, or just kind of the combination of everything. But it just didn't hit. I just don't feel like it hit. It didn't make sense. The way that he had acted kind of throughout, it wouldn't. I don't think Padme would be like, oh, I love this man. This is the way he is incredible. And it almost it almost goes into like pretty dark areas, and I'm like the whole time when he he ended up like destroying that one Tuscan Raider village, after his mom died there. Like that's pretty dark, and she was still like, well, he had to do it.
He
Like that's it just seems like
he
that's
gets
not the
that way
message.
sometimes.
Yeah, right. That's not the message. Especially now I look back at it, I'm like, that's not the message you want to send to people. Like you have this basically murderous person and you're just like, "Oh, but I love him." Like that just didn't make sense to me. So, I got to agree on this one for sure.
This is the scene that I think about when when I think about, like, younger fans of Star Wars who will, like, say how much they love the sequels, and I'm like, "Ah, I don't know," uh, because I don't have the same personal love for the sequels that a lot of other Star Wars fans might, especially younger Star Wars fans that grew up with them. Um, I grew up with this film, and so watching it as a younger than teenager, I didn't find this scene weird. It was just like,
Mm.
this is just what Star Wars is to me. And so I
Right.
can understand from that perspective, like how someone who grows up with the era of Star Wars they're born in, it's like, oh, this is just like I don't find it, weird or bad. But I mean, retrospectively, I can look back on this scene now and think, oh my gosh, what were they doing? Um, have you seen the deleted scene, by the way, where I don't even is it a deleted scene or is it in the film where Anakin, like, force cuts a pear and
I
then
think
puts
that's
is
oh,
that a
is that I think that's deleted scene. I do remember seeing that. I'm like, "Oh, I don't remember seeing this, like, originally." I
and then
think that
he
was deleted
puts the
scene.
piece of the pear on her fork, and it's, like, this really poorly done 2002 like, pear slice that is, like, she's faking like it's going on anyways. And the scene where he's, like, riding the rhinoceros thing, and I don't know. It's
And he
just
falls down and yeah, this whole I mean,
yeah.
that was it was very rom-com-y, like, it was,
Yeah.
it had that feel to it, but, even in this screenshot we have on the video version of the podcast, I mean, if this doesn't shout like 2000s rom-com, I don't know what does.
Yeah, both just staring deeply into each other's eyes. But yeah, as much as Attack of the Clones for being probably one of the less liked Star Wars films across the board, as much as it holds a special place in my heart, this easily needs to be on the top 10 list. So worthily receiving a spot. But we're up to the top 3 now. And this is, I believe, the only one on our entire list that was from the original trilogy, as one of the 10 worst moments in Star Wars history. Actually, from Return of the Jedi, the death of Boba Fett. Kind of ironic because I guess he didn't. Now we know that he didn't die, but he was dead for like, canonically dead, I guess. For well, I actually don't know if he was canonically dead or not.
Yeah.
Presumed dead by most fans for 35 years or whatever it was. Um, this anticlimactic end and almost comical death in the Sarlacc pit, which many fans felt was unworthy of the iconic bounty hunter. I'm pretty sure that in the original edition of the film, so this clam mouth that you see in the special edition wasn't there. And in addition to that, after Boba Fett is consumed by the Sarlacc in the newer special editions, the Sarlacc then burps. So it was almost like George Lucas heard people's cries of, "You can't make his end this way," and he was like, "Watch me."
Watch me.
So I mean, Boba Fett and this is something that's hard for me to grasp as someone who was born in the '90s and didn't experience the explosion of Star Wars in the late '70s and early '80s, especially the early '80s with like the Boba Fett craze. It's hard for me to understand like the hype or the belovedness behind this character because like to me the first time I ever watched the original trilogy, I was like, oh, he just gets eaten by the Sarlacc, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I can imagine how as fans of Star Wars who saw him in 1980 and were like, "This dude is awesome," and then 3 years later, we're like, "He got eaten by a clam in the ground,"
Right.
it definitely is a unfortunate and a really undeserving ending to a character that captured the hearts of so many people back in the early years of Star Wars. And I mean, obviously now we know that he does survive, but it's just such a silly scene, a silly end to this character's arc in the original trilogy that it does feel a little bit unwarranted. I I I don't know if I would have this on my personal top 10, but again, this is one where even if I didn't have it on my personal list, I would understand why it needs to be on a
Mhm.
general consensus top 10 list of Star Wars fans. But what do you think?
I think this is a great example of why it's great to have these conversations, like personal top tens, general top tens. This one wouldn't touch my top 10 probably. I wasn't old enough to really have to gravitate towards Boba Fett. Um, so to if I'm thinking maybe if I'm 20, 25 years old watching Boba Fett for the first time, seeing like, oh, that armor's awesome. Look at this, this bounty hunter's for real. He's a real deal. The scene in Empire when he has Han and he's got the carbonite. He's captured his guy. I'm like, this guy's awesome. So I can see the fandom. I can see the reason behind all of the hype around Boba Fett. But I didn't personally experience any of that. So this absolutely belongs on this list for top 10, like, kind of overall. But like you said, just kind of what happens to him here, it's just kind of, and if I remember correct, doesn't isn't it like just really silly how he gets knocked off the sail barge? Doesn't he just like get like accidentally knocked into maybe by Han or something like that, and then his jetpack goes off and he falls in, and so it just seemed like a Three Stooges type of moment. And then, like you said, after the special edition comes out with the clam, coming out and the burpee, it just seemed like a little bit too much tongue in cheek, a little bit too much on the nose. That this is just kind of like a joke thing. So
Yeah,
I mean, personally, I get it.
I think it's because his jetpack malfunctions because
Mhm.
Han, like, accidentally hits him or I don't know, yeah.
Yeah. So,
I mean,
yeah, not on my top 10, but I think it deserves as far as the overall. I mean, you've got, like you said, 30, 35 years of that the people waited, and then, or not even that long that they waited, but they waited a couple years to only to see that happen. And then how long they had to wait for him to come back, and then that's kind of how they did him, in Book of Boba Fett. So maybe he should have just stayed in that Sarlacc pit. Um
what would this list be without number 2, Joey?
yeah. I mean, this number two here just totally makes sense. I mean, unfortunately, Jar Jar Binks introduction, just the introduction, the fact that he exists in Star Wars: Attack of the Clones here, Anakin Skywalker's awkward and infant. Wait, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. The introduction of the bumbling Gungan character who received widespread criticism for his comic relief and perceived racial stereotyping. So, I mean, yeah, this was even watching in the theaters, I knew, I'm like, I don't know about this one, guys. This doesn't seem like something that I'm really into. Now, if I was a kid, if I was 8 years old, I'd have been like, oh, look at this silly character. This is so funny. I love this guy. I'm gonna buy up all his stuff. So from a marketing standpoint, I kind of get it. But as a fan, for years at that moment to kind of see this, and not even that, like, kind of bumble his way throughout the entire movie, and I'm just like, oh my god, like, I'm just like, dude, this guy, just get rid of him. Why is he so important? Why is he still around? Um, Unfortunately, we do know, like, that the actor was heavily criticized for this as well, Ahmed Best, and to the point where it caused some very personal issues with him. So you know I don't like that part of it. Like, obviously that's a more serious topic, but the character itself, though, the introduction of it, the way he was written in it, very bumbling, very comic relief, as it said. And I remember back then even that there was just a lot of hate for this character. Again, it's unfortunate that the actor had to get a brunt of that. But as of recently, at least he's kind of back around in Star Wars, so that it does end up with a happier story. But just to have this character in Star Wars was kind of shocking when he came out.
This is another example of something that because I was a kid when it came out, I didn't develop the same and, like, the internet wasn't even really a thing yet. Like, it was, but
Mm,
no one went on the internet to, like, see what
complain.
other yeah, or to complain or even to see what other people's opinions about things were, you know? Like, you had to, like, wait until school the next day and talk to your friends about it, you know? Uh, so I grew up, like, during a time like, I was a kid when these movies, when episodes 1, 2, and 3 were all coming out. And so I don't feel like I harbored the same level of disdain for the character that most other people did. Like you said, if I was 8 years old, which is probably I was probably a little bit younger than that the first time I saw this movie, but like, that was the sentiment. I was like, "This is such a fun, goofy character." Like,
Right.
I didn't even know that people hated him until I was probably, like, 13 or something. So he does kinda, like, occupy a special place in my heart. I fully accept that he requires a spot on this list because he's just that ridiculous of a character. Um And, coming off of the original trilogy, and this is one of the first characters that people are seeing, it's like, where what Star Wars world did we just jump back into? But, his introduction, while for me, I don't even think this would be on my personal list, but I absolutely understand why it has to be on on the list. It
Right.
probably has to be in the top 3 of, like, the general consensus Star Wars fans list, so deserves a spot at number 2, I guess, and if you're asking, well, if Jar Jar's number 2, what's number 1? Good question. We'll tell you. The worst Star Wars moment, according to ChatGPT, is the "I don't like sand" line from Anakin Skywalker. Man, this list is just really crapping on Attack of the Clones. I tell you what, like, Attack of the Clones is getting probably deservingly so, getting a brunt of the damage from this list, but, it's this infamous and awkward line that he speaks to Padme. This one really kinda goes hand in hand with number 4 on the list, Anakin and Padme's romance, and it's really just mocked for the extremely clumsy dialogue that takes place in this scene. I was reading actually something online in preparation for this week's episode, why the "I don't like sand" line is actually a really smart line because it, like, grounds Anakin to the hatred of like, I was reading it and I was like, "What?" Like, I get it, but also it's just such a silly, dumb line, like, "I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating. It gets everywhere." He's like
Whoa, Hayden, is that you? Wait.
yeah, he's like sounds like he's, like, 11 and,
Mhm.
it's just a clumsily writ that whole movie, most of the dialogue that's not taking place during a battle is just very clumsy, and this is the best example of it. Another example of it is more of the Anakin Padme romance when they're sitting in the fireplace scene, and he's like, "I'm haunted by the kiss I should never have given you." And
I
it's
forgot
just
about
like,
that.
what is I don't know when we started watching, like, Grey's Anatomy and stopped watching Star Wars, but I just this whole kind of arc with Anakin and Padme is ridiculous, and it's fully embodied in its ridiculousness by the "I don't like sand" line, so did you have any any more thoughts on
I
sand?
I would. I mean, I'll just say one thing. It would have been funnier if he said, "I don't like fire." Like, if that was it, like, if you're gonna go down that road anyway, I don't know. I would have appreciated that line better. Yeah, just like everything you said. It's just the way that this romance was. It kind of just it still doesn't make sense to me. And because of lines like this, you can't tell me that this wooed Padme. Like it's like, oh yeah, like, oh, he just doesn't like sand, whatever. He'll just take out, children and women and Tuscan villages and just so it all just screams like I don't like this. I don't like sand. I guess that's fine.
That's my man, complainer of sand and murderer of Tusken Raiders. Well, quite the list ChatGPT assembled here of top worst moments in Star Wars history. There's a few that I'm a little bit surprised like aren't on here. You and I are both going to each give one that we think should be on this list. One that neither of us gave for our one that we thought was left out, and also that ChatGPT didn't include, um, was like most of the Luke stuff from Last Jedi. Like I was
Yeah,
surprised
that's true.
that
Yeah, yeah.
wasn't on this list because that's something that a lot of Star Wars fans take issue with. I'm sure there's other ones out there. So if there are ones that you're thinking of, if you're listening to this, let us know. Um, but having said that, uh, it's time for us to reveal each of the moments that we thought probably should be included that weren't
Mhm.
in the Chat GPT version on the top 10 worst moments in Star Wars history. What do you have, Joey?
So mine mine is the Luke and Leia kiss. I mean, like
This is a good one. Yeah.
you you knew I mean, I'm assuming you knew what was gonna be the end game here, And for this to have happened at all, that you just don't forget about this thing. Out of all the things they could have, I don't know, with the special edition or any of the edits afterwards that they could have changed or removed or something. I think this one probably could have been number one. That we didn't need We didn't need the Sarlacc pit with the extra clam part. We didn't, need how Jabba was changed like 15 times. We didn't need the who shot first, in comparison to this. This was something that needed to be changed because it just doesn't, you want to talk about cringe in some of the romance between Padme and Anakin. This kind of tops it all. This isn't Game of Thrones, people. This is Star Wars. So please, can we change this a little bit? So this one is probably an easy thing that would have been on my top 10.
Yeah, this is one of those moments that as it was happening, people probably didn't think it was the worst moment in history. And then later in the trilogy, when it's revealed, people were like, ooh, what's it, one of the, when you
Right.
realize you're like, oh my gosh, what, I mean, surely that's a great question. Like when they made Empire, did they know at that point that I guess they did because at the end of the film or at part of the film when Obi-Wan and Yoda are talking as Force
Yeah.
as Yoda and Obi-Wan's Force ghost, he goes, "No, there is
There is
another."
another. Yeah, so they had to
So
know. Yeah.
they already knew
Someone
when
knew.
they made this.
Someone knew.
Yeah,
Someone knew.
George knew. Come on, George, what are you doing? That's a good one.
Jo-
That probably does belong
Wait,
in the top 10.
George R. R. Martin, is that who that was? No, it's just-
Yeah, yeah. That's his. They're actually the same person this whole time. All right, my one that I would include on my list. So, disclaimer with mine, I
As always.
originally yeah, I originally had a specific moment. And then I was thinking cuz in my mind I was trying to think of a moment within Star Wars, right? That is my like one of my worst moments that I think should be included. And then I got to thinking like I think my moment is how I felt after a specific experience. And so I'll elaborate on that more by saying that originally I had a moment from The Rise of Skywalker. I then amended that and simply put The Rise of Skywalker. It is, if you listen to this podcast, it's probably no secret that this is my least favorite Star Wars film. The moment I'm alluding to is I went to see this film with my brothers and my dad. And I'm walking out of the theater, and none of the 3 of them are nearly as big of Star Wars fans as I am. They like it, but it's not like, they don't know some of the lore stuff and the deeper takes or whatever, but and I'm walking out of the theater, and I just remember, like, telling them, like, "Oh my gosh, what they ruined it." I think I said that to my brother, which was a little bit extreme maybe, but also, like, I just
It's
remember
genuine.
yeah, I remember feeling so sad in that moment because I was like, "It's done." That was the Skywalker saga. That's how it ended. I cannot believe that. So there were just so many things in this film. I remember like halfway through, like anytime something happened that I thought was ridiculous, I just kept getting more and more exasperated to the point where by the end of the film, which my original thing I had on this list was the last line of the film where it's that, woman with the camel in the desert and she's like, "What's your name?" And she goes, "Ray." He goes, "Ray who?" And she like takes this really long pause and you're like, "Don't you say it. Don't say it. Don't say it." And this is right after she's buried, Luke and Leia's lightsabers, and she turns back and goes, "Skywalker," and I was like, "Oh, no!" Like, it hit so, like,
Mm.
deep, in a way that it just felt so unearned and, like okay, the sequel trilogy has its issues in that there were different directors, there was no planning. So, all of that aside, like, the message of the sequel trilogy going into episode 9, especially with Broom Boy at the end of episode 8, like we talked about earlier, is that, like, it's not important who you are. It's the fact that, like, in this story that the sequels was telling, like, you don't have to be a Skywalker or a Palpatine, like, you can just be Rey, you know? And as much as some fans may not have liked that, at least it was, like, a congruent story. And then episode 9, the entire thing is like, let's just walk all of that back. Let's make her the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine because
Mhm.
that's not weird or anything. And then at the end of the film, she's just like, I'm a Skywalker now. And that's how the trilogy ends. it was just so off-putting, and I remember feeling so just disheartened and sad, and so if I had to pick a specific moment, maybe it would be the end of the film.
Hmm.
For the sake of just, like, having a bunch of other things, I also wrote down 10 other moments from the film, like Finn's secret that he never tells, Kylo
Yeah.
and Rey's interaction with, like, "You're alive, now I'm healing you, now I'm dead." Like, it was like, "Wha
Yeah.
what?" Obviously, we talked about the Palpatine thing returning earlier. Suddenly there's, like, Star Destroyers that all have Death Star lasers on them, and, just I don't know, and General Hux being the mole this whole time and then, like, being killed as soon as he reveals it. Rose
One moment, Ben. One moment.
yeah, sorry. Rose's role being completely relegated in this film
Yeah.
after being a main character in Last Jedi. I mean, there's literally so many things.
Yeah.
I had like 8 more on that list, but for the sake of time. So having said that, I know that was a long spiel, and I would just probably generally say the feeling I had at the end of The Rise of Skywalker.
Hmm.
Or if I had to narrow it down to something in the film, it would probably be the very end when Rey was like, "I'm a Skywalker now." So that's gonna be mine, but let us know, what is your worst moment in Star Wars history in your opinion? Was it something we listed today on our list that ChatGPT provided, or was it something else? Let us know in the YouTube comments or over on the socials, with what your thoughts might be in that regard. And once again, keep an eye out on the YouTube community tab as well as the Hoth Hangout Twitter to cast your vote in response to that question this week. Additionally, as mentioned, or perhaps not as mentioned because we haven't talked about that during this episode, next week's episode, episode 95, is going to be on Star Wars planets. We're going to be doing a planets tier list. It's going to be a fun time. We haven't done a tier list episode in a good while, like
Hmm.
maybe even like a year, I want to say. It's been quite some time. So I'm excited to get back to another tier list episode where you and I sort of collaboratively work on this as we go through, and we'll try to get one with maybe I don't know 25, 30 planets on it, and make our way through it. And hope to have you joining us for next week's episode of the podcast when we'll be ranking all the Star Wars planets. So having said all of that, want to give you a reminder that if you're not yet subscribed to the Hot Hangout channel on YouTube, check us out there for the video version of every podcast, as well as all of our latest reactions to Star Wars shows when they go live. Thank you to the 451 of you who are subscribed there. Shout out to Snoop Dogg for being one of the 451. You can contact us via email at hothangout@gmail.com with your Star Wars thoughts, questions, or otherwise, and we would love to showcase them here on the podcast. You can find the Hoth Hangout podcast anywhere you get your pods, including both Spotify and Apple. And if you're listening on either of those platforms or any platform that allows you to leave a 5-star review, leave a 5-star review on the pod. We'd appreciate it very much. And it does also allow it to be more easily discovered by other people as well. We're on the socials on Instagram, TikTok, and X at Hoth Hangout. On each of those, check us out there, as well as over on the Hoth Hangout community Discord server, for which the link to join can be found down in the show notes of today's episode. Joey, what do you think? The final thoughts on today's list provided to us by ChatGPT of the worst moments in Star Wars history.
Like I said, it's a weird thing to talk about because you don't normally put lists of things that you generally don't like. But it was a fun one. It was fun to see, to be able to talk about these things, what we agree on. I think there were a couple of misses here again where maybe I wouldn't have put it on there, and there were some misses on the other side where I would have definitely put something like Rey Skywalker on there. That I would have expected to be on there, or even the kind of the fall of Luke there as well. So pretty fun. I had a good time. It just feels funny. It feels funny because you and I are normally just so positive, but we have to we do recognize that there are some issues with Star Wars here and there, and this is the way we wanted to get through it. We copped out and we let ChatGPT tell the story. We just kind of talked about it from that standpoint, but I thought it was a good one. And another big shout out to Gibbo, if I could, real quick. He put together a whole new video layout here for the video version of the podcast. So thanks again, Gibbo, for that, and I hope you guys are enjoying the new visuals here.
The new visuals definitely look so cool. Like,
Yeah, they
as
do.
they're going throughout, switching from point to point, talking about today, it was just like, oh, that looks nice. That looks nice. So, like you said, shout out to Gibbo for producing today's video show and assets, who will never be on any worst list ever. So, appreciate you, Gibbo. Much love. And thank you to all of you for listening to today's episode. Shout out to George Lucas and Dave Filoni. Shout out to Boba Fett and Sand and Attack of the Clones because it's it's the most hated on movie, and I refuse to hate on Attack of the Clones. And shout out to ChatGPT for giving us the lists for the last 2 weeks episodes. So thank you all for listening so very much. We hope to catch you all next week during episode 95, where we will be covering our Star Wars planets tier lists. So hope to catch you for that one. And thanks again for listening to this one. Hope you have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. We'll catch you next time. And until then, may the force be with you.